I just celebrated my 48th birthday, and I took the time to reflect back on my startup career. And instead of doing a video about the 48 lessons that I've learned at 48, I've narrowed it down to the 8 lessons I've learned in my 40s as a startup founder that I wish I knew in my 20s. Now, if we haven't met before, welcome to my YouTube channel. If we have met before, welcome back. My name is Ed Kang, 7-time funded founder with 2 exits, which is just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times to your benefit because I use these videos and this YouTube channel to share all the mistakes that I've made, hoping that other people, other founders, especially early stage ones, can learn and reduce the damage that the mistakes can cause. Not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try to make your life easier. And that's where this list comes from, is a reflection on my journey and the things that I know now that I wish I knew back then that would have helped me in my startup career. And before we continue, if you like this type of content, please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know. I usually do pitch deck reviews and all sorts of things about fundraising, but if you want to learn more personal stuff, I'd love to hear what you think. Let's jump into the list. This list is in no particular order whatsoever, but if I thought about it, the first thing that jumped out to me is I wish I learned how to code, or at least code more than what I do. I'm okay because I learned how to do HTML back in the Notepad days. That totally dates me. I'm that old. Yes, I am. And I would code HTML by hand, and that provided me a foundation to hack enough to let me get away with prototyping when I needed to. But looking back, I wish I would have learned to code more because startup teams that are technical and can develop their own product do much better, especially when it comes to raising funding from investors. And if I'd learned to code more, I would have been less reliant on dev shops, freelancers, and trying to find that technical co-founder, which can be really difficult. So at least if I had been able to code a little more, I would have been able to get further along, get funding, and bring on these technical co-founders that I needed. These days, I focus on no-code or low-code MVPs, and that's okay because the tools are there. But back then, in my 20s, if I would have learned that, it would have provided me a wonderful foundation that I could use now. Lesson number 2 is hire slow, fire fast, build teams. There have been many times that I have hired really fast or brought in co-founders or partners way too quickly, and I wish I would have gone slower. And then other times when I hung on to those relationships way too long, and I avoided the tough conversations because people were my friends, and I was afraid to make those tough decisions, and all I did was burn up more and more runway until it was too late. On top of that, I wish I would have learned to build teams better. Teams are everything. Startup is a team sport. It is not a solo sport. You can start off as a solo founder, but only get you so far. Especially if you're raising investment, they want you to be able to build teams. I wish I would have learned those skills earlier. I think I do a pretty good job of that in my late 40s now. But man, in my early 20s, did I ever struggle? And this burnt me and made me hire very fast, fire very, very slow when I should have been hiring slow and firing fast. Number 3, optimize for profit versus exit. One of the traps that I got into was taking on investors that were driving me for the exit. They were looking for liquidity and they wanted that spectacular ROI on their money. Unfortunately, a lot of times I ended up doing the startup for the investors rather than for the users, my customers, and achieving profitability. I look back now, and if I just would have stayed on course and optimized for profitability versus hyper growth for some type of exit or liquidity, I would have built startups that were way more resilient and would have had less failures than I have now. What this lesson really leads to is that startups are not a good way to make money. If you're in startups just because it seems like the quick way to make money because you see all these fabulous stories out there, these celebrity CEOs of startups and founders that are turning into billionaires. If you do that for that reason, then you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot, sabotage your future profitability and future of the entire startup before you even begin. Number 4, distribution is as important as development. There's been many times where I focused on just developing the product. The product had to be perfect because you only have so many hours during the day. And if I would have known back then what I know now, which is the 40-40-20 rule, I spend 40% of my time developing the product, 40% of the time on distribution, talking to users, trying to get them to pay, finding out what they need to refer other customers, everything like that. And then 20% of my time in self-care, I would be so much further along and I wouldn't have been caught in those situations where I spent all this time building a product that nobody really cared about. Making sure distribution is just as important as development allows you this continuous feedback loop to get feedback from customers that you can then put into your development. And so you're not building features that are not going to move the needle in terms of your traction. I look at some of my products now and I look at some of the features and I get so frustrated going, what was I thinking? Because they're basically dead features that aren't used by users to this very day. Focusing on distribution also would have helped with fundraising because I would have been making money as I go and I would have been less interested in the amount of money that I was getting. I would have extended my runway, and that's the best time to raise investment is when you don't need it. You only need it to grow, not to survive. And unfortunately, many instances, I ended up raising funds because I need to survive. And I ended up giving away too much of the company or agreeing to terms I shouldn't have because I was not focused on distribution. It was just development. Number 5, money changes everything. There's been many times where suddenly there's a windfall of profit, where there's investment that hits the bank, and everybody around me changed. Even I changed. I started interacting with other people differently. And I remember looking at the large sums of money in my bank account or the large sums of money that our stock was worth way back in the day, and everybody changed around me. Not only were people kind of throwing money at me and saying, can you put this into the stock so we can make money, all that stuff, but also people started having expectations on me, and it was not a good feeling. And I don't know if I would have been able to learn this lesson in my 20s because I was young and I liked being flashy and I liked all the lifestyle that the money allowed me to have. But I look back and I go, if I just would have learned some of the lessons, or I would have had a mentor sit me down and explain to me financial savviness, financial literacy, I probably would have avoided a lot of headaches and digging myself some of the holes that I got into that I now am out of in my 40s. But man, did it ever cause me a lot of pain in my 30s because I dug the hole in my 20s and I had to work myself out of the hole in my 30s so I could at least have some peace of mind in my 40s. I would never want anybody else to go through what I've gone through with all the risks that I've taken. It put my family through some really rough times. I wish I would have avoided it. Learn that lesson in your 20s if that's where you are. Number 6, I wish I would have finished college. I have 5 years of post-secondary education and I have not finished a single bachelor's degree, and I wish I would have ticked that off the box because I look back and I go, I'm not going to go back there now, but it's something I wish I would have completed. It's kind of like an empty chapter. There's no ending to that chapter in my book, and I like to have all that buttoned up and think back to myself, yeah, I was able to accomplish those things, not for the things that I learned, because even in the 5 years, I don't use very much of what I learned in college right now. But I wish I would have done it just for me, my sense of accomplishment, my sense of fulfillment. Number 7, your first success is a fluke. This is a really harsh lesson because my first company right out of college, going back to dropping out of college, I was able to sell. It wasn't a massive exit, but it was enough to get me out of debt and pay back our investors a very, very nice return, which set the foundation of my reputation to allow me to work with investors today. But the problem was, since my first venture was an exit, I thought I could just repeat it over and over again. And that was not the case. I went from failure and tragedy to failure and tragedy. I stacked up a bunch of L's before I had my next win, and even then I thought I could do it again. I couldn't. And I realize now that being successful in startups, so many things have to come together, including luck. Some people would describe it as the puck has to drop your way. You have to catch that lucky break. The stars align. Fortune favors the prepared, and that's important. You need to be prepared for success, but you also have to understand a lot of things have to come together, and they don't always. In fact, it's very rare for you to be successful. So I wish I would have learned that lesson way back then, and I would have guided my future startups with a little more wisdom, a little more savvy, and not had this bravado, this ego that I could just wave a magic wand, snap my fingers, and keep doing success after success. It just wasn't there. It was a fluke, and learning that lesson would have prepared me better and probably would have saved me from entering into some of those ventures along the way. And finally, number 8, health is the foundation. I spent my 20s sacrificing physical health, emotional health, and mental health trying to chase startups. And I regret all of that to this day. There's not a day that goes by where I'm not dealing with the sacrifice that I made. I'm being very vulnerable and transparent here. You don't want to get stuck in that hole. The financial hole is one thing. You can dig yourself out in a very short amount of time. But health, that is another issue completely. And I'm still working on it. And I think I'm going to be working on it for the rest of my life. I wish I would have taken care of myself in my 20s. I know a lot of you are in your 20s that you're listening to this, or in your 30s. It's not too late. Don't wait till your 40s, because when you hit 50, that's when everything starts to fall apart, or so I hear. And I'm working really hard in the next 2 years. It's one of my resolutions to get into the best shape of my life by the time I hit 50. But it's so much harder than if I would have set the foundation and I would have kept up the good habits that I had in my early 20s. Nothing is worth you sacrificing your physical, mental, and emotional health on the altar of startups because you're going to pay for it later. Your kids are going to pay for it. Your future generation is going to pay for it. And that's what I'm really thinking about these days. When I get in my 40s, my legacy as a startup founder. And I think that's the reason that I do these YouTube videos and I try to pass on to all you young buckaroos out there. I hope this has been illuminating, to say the least. Look forward to your comments. Thanks again to everybody at startups.com and the other communities I'm part of for wishing me a happy birthday. I say this with complete gratitude. I appreciate it all. I'll see you in the next video.